Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
Later in the pod, Jon catches up with Ari Berman from Mother Jones about the recent Supreme Court rulings on partisan gerrymandering and the census. Before that, we're going to talk about Trump's dictator buddies, Kamala Harris's momentum, and the direction of the Democratic Party. Light stuff. Also, the latest episode of This Land is out, called The Land Grab. Big news on this podcast in general. The Supreme Court did not offer a decision on the Murphy case and has asked for it to be retried next term. So now you have a little while longer to catch up on the podcast. Thislandpodcast.com. Subscribe, listen, and you can find out what is at stake in this incredibly compelling story that we're now going to have to wait a couple more months, maybe a year. We'll see to figure out what the Supreme Court's doing here. Fascinating. And we have no information either about why they decided to retry it.
We were afraid that the court would rule before you got to episode 7 of the podcast, which was built as a cliffhanger for the ruling.
Now the cliffhanger lasts.
Now the cliffhanger lasts a couple months. But you know what? That's life.
That's life. That's life. But anyway, check it out. It's a fantastic podcast. Dan Pfeiffer will be talking to Colorado Senator Michael Bennet later today for the next installment of our 2020 candidate series. Almost at the end. Just a few more stragglers, plus Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
Can't get Bernie or Biden in the studio.
I think Bernie we're making some progress on, I think. Biden, I'll tell you, it's a problem. Anyway, and then so Dan's interview with Bennett will be going out later this week. Dan and I will also be recording a mailbag edition of the pod that will go out Thursday. We're going to probably do that on Tuesday. So please send us your questions on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Send us your questions. We'll answer them. Some of them, maybe. All right. Let's get to the news. Over the course of a relatively short trip abroad, the President of the United States kissed the asses of 3 different murderous tyrants: Vladimir Putin of Russia, who attacked our election, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, who ordered the murder of a Washington Post columnist, and Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who's trying to build nuclear weapons that can reach the United States. On Sunday, let's start with North Korea. Trump became the first sitting United States president to ever set foot in North... Ooh. On Sunday, Trump became the first sitting United States president to ever set foot in North Korea, an impromptu meeting at the demilitarized zone that came about after Trump tweeted the following. If Chairman Kim...
I can't.
The tweet's so funny.
I can't.
If Chairman Kim of North Korea sees this, I would meet him at the border/DMZ just to shake his hand and say, hello, parentheses, question mark, end parentheses, exclamation point. After their conversation, Trump said that he and Kim agreed to resume the nuclear talks that fell apart after Trump walked away from a deal in Hanoi 4 months ago and ended the talks. Lovett, how big of a deal is this? Did the meeting change anything? Historic first steps into North Korea?
Wow. I saw a lot of people, I saw some journalism that lifted this moment up as being extraordinary, and I suppose it is pretty nuts to have the president just walk across the DMZ into North Korea to say hi to his buddy.
Based on an impromptu
in quotes. Well, apparently Trump mentioned his impromptu meeting a week ago to The Hill, and then they had to get The Hill to not publish it because it was a security problem. Of course, Trump is a security problem, so what are you going to do? But it's an image, right? That Donald Trump thinks in images. His whole presidency for him is about images. He's a president for television. It's the only part of the job he cares about. So when he crosses into North Korea, it makes for a big photo op. That's what he wanted. But what I was struck by is it's a photo op. It's a photo op without all the pieces of it that are supposed to make it big and important.
Right.
So I was thinking about other famous presidential moments, right? You think of Rabin and Arafat. You think of Sadat and Begin. You think of Sadat. You think of Carter. I'm not just going to say what that names. You think of Carter meeting with Egypt and Israel. You think of Nixon and China, important moments. But what undergirds them is the diplomatic work and meetings and considerations that make the actual involvement of the American president valuable and part of the negotiations themselves. But less work went into a détente between Donald Trump and North Korea than between like Katy Perry and Taylor Swift. So. Like that, the diplomatic legwork that went into Katy Perry and Taylor Swift becoming friends in public had more of the look of a foreign policy apparatus than what Donald Trump is currently doing at the G20.
It was at least teased, you know.
It was
You knew.
was teased. There were some underlying negotiations that had to take place first. They all understood the goals. They agreed to a set of conditions. There was the communique.
I mean, here's where we are in North Korea. We had talked about how this is a very difficult challenge for any U.S. president, Democrat, Republican, or Trump. But where we are is Trump comes into office in 2017. They conduct a nuclear test. You know, then Trump starts going nuts on Twitter, you know, fire and fury, Rocket Man, all the bad shit, like, you know, bring us closer to war. And then they start these negotiations. And since then, basically, we have a few hostages back. Some remains of U.S. service members have been returned, though that's on pause. We have suspended joint military exercises with the South Koreans, which North Korea wanted. But North Korea is still testing missiles. They're still developing nuclear weapons. They're still resisting any kind of inspection regime whatsoever. So Trump is basically where every other president has been, except that North Korea has just further along in their nucler program. And now they're talking about
and been elevated by the American president.
And they've been elevated by, but even talking about the problem itself. So now that Trump has restarted the talks that he himself pulled out of, in the New York Times, David Sanger and Michael Crowley have this piece where they're reporting that the Trump administration is now hoping to negotiate some kind of a nuclear freeze, where Kim proposes to stop developing nuclear material at a number of different sites in exchange for sanction relief. So the Trump administration's goal at the beginning of the administration is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and inspectors in there. It's verifiable, all this kind of stuff. They've basically given up on that, and now are accepting the fact that North Korea will be a nuclear power, but they're just hoping that they don't make more weapons, and in exchange may possibly give them sanctions relief.
But you saw that John Bolton also went on Twitter to say that that's not true. So on top of all of this,
because I'm sure he's against it.
Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah, well, he's got a multiple choice test, and there's only one answer. Again and again and again. Yeah.
That's John Bolton.
Yeah, John Bolton's general checkers strategy is to flip the board over in 100% of games,
and then attack it with a nuclear warhead.
Yeah. So it's, what can I say, John? It's a mess.
Here's a sampling of some of the headlines from this weekend. Washington Post: Trump scores his biggest live show yet in North Korea. Politico: Trump's made-for-TV moment. And our favorite, ABC's Jonathan Karl, quote, in terms of sheer performance, this may be the biggest moment of the Trump presidency so far.
These are so.
I just want to ask you, do you think it's weird that certain journalists actually report on how they're getting manipulated by politicians with no sense of irony?
Right. It's what is it? So honestly, like, that is, I feel like, a too intellectual a critique for how I feel about it, because I don't even understand what the terms mean. His biggest show yet. What are you talking about? Because yes, you're exactly right. Like, this is a PR stunt, and they're saying, what a PR stunt, right? And that's a problem, serious problem.
This is a stunt to manipulate reporters, and they're like, boy, have they ever done that.
Wow. They got us. This worked on me.
Because look at us. We are just going to broadcast images of this meeting over and over. We're going to give you all the headlines that Trump wanted. Boy, have they fooled us.
But even before you get to that, it's I don't even buy the argument on their terms, because what world are we living in where I think it actually is, it's naive in another way, in that it fails to appreciate just how much Donald Trump has devalued the presidency and the artifice of his job altogether. So, okay, the American people turn on their television and they see Donald Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un. Maybe in another time, a better time, a worse time, a different time, people would think, wow, that's a big deal. What I'm seeing here is monumental. It is historic. But I don't think we put Trump's behavior into terms like that anymore. I think we see them exclusively on his terms. I think that so much of our political conversation is really kind of is swirling around his narcissism. So what we really see is a coup for Donald Trump personally, and everyone kind of understands that. How does this play into Donald Trump's role in our politics, his reelection, his experience of the world? I don't think anybody sees this as anything having to do with America's interests at all. I don't think the Trump show and America's show are one show to anyone, Republican or Democrat.
I think they are for a lot of Republican voters because they, I don't know if you saw, oh my God, did you see the Fox and Friends clip where they open the show to talk about what happened in the meeting and they play DJ Khaled, All I Do Is Win? Like, seriously, they didn't play showing Trump and Kim Jong-un. So, like, Trump's out there, but you're absolutely right that his foreign policy is all about him. It's about glorifying him as a leader. It's about saying that he's a winner.
Rejecting Obama.
And then he's hoping to say that because I'm a winner, America's a winner too. Even while, and Tommy always points this out, he is just getting worked on the world stage by every single bad actor out there, right? They are all manipulating him. They all know his number. He's getting nothing for the United States and our security. He's getting everything for either himself, his reputation, his financial standing, his next election, right? Because he's got Putin and other countries maybe interfering in our election for him. So he's getting a lot of shit for him, or at least he thinks he is. And he's getting nothing for us because these people know his fucking number.
But even Laura Ingram's heart doesn't seem to be in it. You know, oh, what a win for Donald Trump. He sat down with Kim Jong-un and the world will never be the same. I don't think she's buying it. I honestly don't think it's signaling to the audience to not be bothered by this and to treat it the way we treat everything else, which is just another partisan cudgel, right? Like what he's doing, Donald Trump is doing well. It doesn't matter how many times I said Barack Obama shouldn't meet with dictators. It doesn't matter what we've been pumping to you for a decade on this network about dealing with your adversaries. It does. None of that matters. All that matters is here's the talking points for you. Here's how you should feel about it. Don't let it bother you, and we'll all move forward.
Yeah. So Trump also met with Putin where he playfully warned him to not launch another attack on our election and joked about their shared disdain for journalists, saying, quote, "Get rid of them. Fake news is a great term, isn't it? You don't have this problem in Russia, but we do." Yes, they don't have that problem in Russia because Putin controls the fake news media and also has journalists who question him murdered. So that's why they don't have that problem. Trump also made time for breakfast with Mohammed bin Salman, who he called a friend, and congratulated him on doing a spectacular job. He said in a news conference that MBS was, quote, very angry and very unhappy about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and said absolutely nothing about the fact that our own intelligence community has overwhelming evidence that MBS ordered the killing himself.
I want to understand what conservatives would do. I want to understand. I know it's become passé to even say this, but I want to understand what conservatives would do if Barack Obama met with a dictator who had recently cut to pieces and disposed of the body of a National Review writer. What would they do? How would they react to that? I mean, how would they feel about it?
It's just so, it's even like so beyond that. Like the excuses he uses to, and this goes back to what we were just talking about with like his foreign policy being intensely personal and about himself. You know, he's like, well, here's the deal with Saudi Arabia. They're buying lots of stuff. They're buying lots of weapons from us. They have great defense contracts and other stuff too. They're buying other goods too. So basically his thing is Saudi Arabia is helping make certain defense contractors and other businessmen in this country rich. So, you know, if they kill a few people, if they kill a few journalists, what are you going to do? We need them, you know, which is just like such a...
Well, it's like such a step beyond the kind of, you know, many liberals and many on the left have long critiqued America's bipartisan foreign policy for being too comfortable with some of the most despicable dictators in the world, including Saudi Arabia. But this goes another step. It goes beyond that, right? Not just to disregard it, but to praise him.
That's what I was saying.
To welcome him, make sure he faces no consequences because of his personal relationship to you and your son-in-law.
What kind of serious consequences would a Democratic president or another Republican president have? You know, sorry. What would what would another Democratic president or Republican president have done to Saudi Arabia if they were in office when Khashoggi was murdered? We don't know. We don't know how far they would have gone, but we know for certain that they wouldn't have had breakfast with the guy, said he was doing a spectacular job, called him a friend, they wouldn't have done that. That is uniquely dangerous and uniquely Trumpian.
Yeah, almost as if it's, and he's not unaware of this. He knows what he's doing.
And Putin, by the way, we kind of skipped over the Putin thing too. Putin, who was like, yeah, so a reporter's like, did you ask him about election interference? Did you tell him not to interfere in the election? And he's like, oh, all right, I'll do it now. Don't you interfere in that election? And then they both laughed. What the fuck are you doing? It's, I think this is an issue that the Democratic presidential candidates have not done enough to talk about. I would be all over this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and yes.
I noticed that Joe Biden's rapidly responding campaign put out a statement from Biden about North Korea just now.
Oh, look, they got a lot on their plate this weekend.
They do.
A lot of tough weekends. So.
And I saw like Kamala Harris and a couple other Democratic candidates tweeted about it too. But I think this is sort of a sleeper issue that people, Trump's friendships with dictators who wish us harm all around the world.
Yeah,
doesn't seem great.
It's not great, John. Well, Helsinki did matter. It really did matter to people. It seemed to have broken through in a way other Donald Trump malfeasance hadn't. So I do think there's some meat on that meat on that bone.
Before we move on, we should also talk about Trump's batshit crazy press conference on Saturday at the G20.
Like, this is, we're just sitting here like, the President of the United States, who is an international joke, went to the G20 and across virtually any issue you can name, made an abject fool of himself, achieved nothing for the United States.
No.
Left only having damaged our reputation in the world. And, oh, by the way, a bunch of foreign leaders had looks on their faces that just said, after this is over, we go to a quiet place and make fun of Ivanka for an hour. That's what my eyes saying. I am the leader of Japan. My face has 3 facial expressions. One of them is serious, one of them is very serious, and now introducing the third, I'm going to go fucking talk shit about Ivanka. Those are my 3 faces.
It's really inspiring.
Can I butt in? I'd like to butt. Okay. I'm Ivanka.
They're just having a good conversation. It's like that person who just comes like, oh, I have a story.
Oh,
no,
God.
Not that person. Who let her here? I don't understand.
$5,000 dress.
She doesn't even know what she's talking about. So Trump at this press conference defends Putin, defends MBS, trashes Jimmy Carter, trashes John Kerry, says he broke the law, trashes Hillary Clinton, said Kamala Harris has gotten too much credit for her critique of Joe Biden. And he also responded the following way when a reporter asked him about Putin's attack on, quote, Western-style liberalism. Here's the answer from Donald Trump, quote, I guess you look at what's happening in Los Angeles, where it's so sad to look, and what's happening in San Francisco, and a couple of other cities which are run by an extraordinary group of liberal people. I don't know what they're thinking, but he does see things that are happening in the United States that would probably preclude him from saying how wonderful it is.
It is worth always remembering that we were beat by the dumbest fucking criminals. Donald Trump just doesn't know about liberalism as a broader philosophy of governance. He thinks of it only in terms of American-style liberalism. That's all it means to him. He isn't aware of some larger philosophy of liberal values.
It's sort of like how he thinks about democracy, which is a big inconvenience to him. Like people. It's not like he's some secret autocrat that's been plotting this all along. He sort of fell into autocracy because he thinks it is the easier path to govern. Well, when I'm the president, I'm in charge. I should be able to get done whatever the fuck I want to get done. Why are we wasting time with Congress and people voting and all this bullshit?
Yeah, he's a fascist savant. It's up to and including when he's like on stage at the military academy. He's like, look at these rippling muscles. It's very fascist. He wants
we have tanks rolling into D.C. this weekend for the fucking 4th of July.
To protect us from the 4th of July. And they might not get him tanks, so they're going to get him like armored vehicles.
Yeah, because they don't want
to
ruin the sidewalks.
He doesn't know the difference either. He just wants fucking
you
camo.
get him fucking plastic tanks. He wouldn't know the difference.
He just wants some good desert beige or green machines.
He wants Jonathan Karl to say it was a great made-for-TV moment on the 4th. That's what he wants.
I would not be surprised to hear Donald Trump just sort of riffing, being like, hey, and when the troops walk, You know what'd be cool? What if they kept their legs straight? Like, have they ever thought about that? I think it would look really cool if their legs didn't like it because it would imply a level of control from the state that they're not walking naturally, and the rhythm of it I think would be very compelling. What if they walk like birds? You know, like ducks. We call it duck walking, or you know, like there's other kinds of like the way geese walk, something like that. You know, like a bird walk. We call it bird walking.
Maybe they could salute.
Bird stepping.
Maybe there's like a special salute they could do with
like
their
a
hand.
wave, a special wave where you kind of hold your hand up.
Yeah. I think it would look cool.
Yeah, and like I love the American flag, but like it represents all of the people. But like, what if there was one that really showed how loyal you were to the the
people
ground,
don't need
the
all of those,
soil?
People don't need all of those stars to count up the states. They know the states. You could just put my picture on it; it would be fine. So there's also, by the way, when they asked him about the controversy over busing from the debate, and they asked him what he thought of busing, and first of all, he said, "Well, just you wait. I got a plan for that coming out in a couple of weeks."
Jesus Christ!
Yeah, I'm sure
That's
he does.
alarming.
And then they asked him, they pressed him on busing, and he's like, "Yeah, well, you know, busing is something that happens, and I just don't know that there's that many other ways for kids to get to school."
No idea. He has, which is interesting, right? It actually,
it's too bad for him because he would love to shit on busing.
No, right. That's what's so surprising about it, because there's no one who's had a fucking like Donald Trump has not really read the news since the 1980s, but when he was reading the news, his fingers went right to the part of the New York Post where white parents in Boston were furious about busing. Like, he should know about busing because it's right there in his fucking racial grievance erogenous zone.
Yeah, no shit. All right, well, let's talk about 2020. So that's Donald Trump. He shouldn't be president.
Okay. Update. Listen, hot fucking news out of the G20. He should not be president. It is a fucking joke.
It is, and you know, obviously we did 15 minutes on Trump being bad, but Brian Stelter noted this actually yesterday, which is, he's like, is Trump being graded on a curve? Because we're about to have a conversation about the Democratic Party, the different candidates, you know, who's doing well, who's not. And I do think we're sort of getting back to this 2016 vibe where you have two sides of a coin, right? And so there's a bunch of reporting and analysis about Donald Trump being crazy, but you have to balance that equally with, well, but the Democratic Party, I don't know if they're ready to beat him. They're in disarray. And look, you know, we've been critical about the party too, but it's hard to have both Donald Trump and the eventual nominee or the candidates trying to replace him on that same plane.
Yes. Well, you know, there was an op-ed in the Post that said none of the Democrats seem presidential. It's like, why did they not?
Yeah.
What
which
are you
is fucking
Give me a
ridiculous.
fucking break. And then the other piece of this is the fact checkers have had a real problem here, right? Because the fact checkers have spent the last 2 years sort of, you know, counting up Donald Trump's Pinocchios and other I don't know, nose growths. I don't know how they measure lies anymore. But they had to go through the Democratic debate, and the Democratic debate was a largely accurate affair. Right. These are people who were very, very careful with their words. You know, these are.
That's our message for 2020. A largely accurate affair.
So Beto says things like now, if Donald Trump were president, if Donald Trump were a Democrat, he is president technically. If Donald Trump were a Democrat, he'd say, you know, they stole all your money and they gave it to the corporations, right? But Beto O'Rourke says the Republican tax cut favored corporations, and then they have to fact check it, and they have to find a way to make favored corporations, which it clearly did in virtually every way,
right.
Find the way in which it maybe in some small way elides the truth. Same thing with Bernie Sanders saying that 3 people control more wealth than the bottom 50%. And the fact check is hilarious because the fact check is like, well, actually, the reason the bottom of the 50% don't have as much wealth as the top 3 is that they're in a lot of debt.
Yeah, and then
So,
on the other hand,
that's not better.
They asked Donald Trump to explain busing, and he starts like singing "Wheels on the Bus," you know. So you're like, well, that's also off, but in a different way.
Yeah, it is. It's wild. Yeah, they're gonna hold. Yeah, we're gonna do the whole fucking cycle again.
So we now have polling and fundraising evidence that Kamala Harris is gaining support after her strong debate performance in Miami last week, part of which involved challenging Joe Biden about his past work with segregationist senators to oppose busing. The Harris campaign raised more than $2 million in the day after the debate. And a new poll by Morning Consult found that Harris has moved all the way up to 3rd place in the Democratic field, gaining 6 percentage points from where she was right before the debate. That's doubling her support in a poll. Lovett, what does she do to build on the momentum here? Does she has she found a line of criticism? Does she want to keep criticizing Biden or offer some other contrast with him on another issue, or does she try something else here?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I do think it would be a lot if she comes to the next debate with like a ready to go hit on Joe Biden.
Yeah, that probably is a lot.
You know,
we don't know if they're going to be on the same stage.
And that boy was actually my cousin. So it's a little bit further away, but still personal. So that one's the cousin. This is about healthcare.
It is a tough question for all of these candidates in a very large field, and even a large field of frontrunners, really. Like even the top tier is pretty crowded compared to past elections. And so you have to find these moments where you stand up because there's so much noise otherwise, and the debates are the big moments left, because everyone's done their town halls, and there's the power of the first town hall that you do on CNN or MSNBC sort of wears off after a while. It's not like your speeches are getting carried live. Attacking Trump doesn't necessarily get you a lot of attention, and it does seem like we're heading to the place in the primary, which happens every primary, where the way you get attention and the way you get noticed is to critique or at least offer contrast with your fellow primary candidates.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do think Kamala's in a unique position compared to everyone else, which is that she is potentially about to go from being someone beneath the frontrunners to among the frontrunners,
right.
And in an odd way, she may be getting the look that Pete Buttigieg got, that others have gotten. So it is actually a bigger opportunity for her to flesh out her argument for her own candidacy in a bigger way. This is something we said before the debate, that we were looking forward to Kamala Harris on the debate stage, in part because she made so much of her candidacy about it. And it's incredibly impressive that she rose to that moment. That's very, very difficult to do. But now that she has this spotlight, it can't just be about making that point again. There's a larger argument she needs to make about why she is the person to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party that I don't think to this point she has well made.
No, and I think part of the reason is she eyes the field and eyes the electorate and thinks she can potentially build maybe one of the biggest, broadest coalitions here of the Democratic base. And I think they have been trying to figure out, how does she stand out? And they've answered that question by saying, okay, well, she's a prosecutor. She can prosecute the case against Trump. And by the way, in these hearings and in these debates, she's fucking stellar and can kick everyone's ass. And that's a great, great skill to have. The question is, can you put it all together and say, again, Elizabeth Warren, in 5 seconds why she's running and what her story is. You know that to be true about Pete Buttigieg, even if he doesn't have all the policies to back it up. It's generational change. And Kamala has not sort of nailed that story yet. And I would spend some time. And now, look, nailing that story doesn't automatically get you press attention. But I think if she's going to contrast herself with Joe Biden, it has to be more than about that one issue. And she has to make a larger argument why her and why not Joe Biden or even some of these other candidates probably in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and it is sort of there, right? I mean, it is part of what Pete is saying. It's part of what Warren is saying. It's part of what Eric Swalwell is saying. That it is.
It is.
That
torch.
I mean, the torch passing is part of this debate. That's change. We're talking about change, and she can represent change in a way that Joe Biden can't. That's her argument, and she needs to sort of articulate that vision, I think.
Yeah. There's a New York Times story that Trump and other Republicans are a little more nervous about Kamala than they were at first. Do we buy that? And why are they? They've gone to so many different. They're sort of like I think they whiplash back and forth with the electorate in the news cycle. First they're scared of Biden when Biden's up. Now they're scared of Kamala when Kamala's up.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I didn't even bring my wallet. I don't. I'm not particularly interested in the kind of reverse psychology of leaks from the Trump camp. Who are they worried about? Who are they pretending to be worried about? I don't think we should really be playing that game any more than we should be playing the game of listening to who lifelong Republicans think are driving them away. I don't. we gotta focus. We gotta play our game. To use a sports term,
we should mention yes. To use a sport, that's a very
we have to play our game.
Adept sports term. Very.
We have to play
specific.
the game we came here to play.
That's
not the game they want us to play.
So what What should Joe Biden be doing here? When he spoke at Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition in Chicago the day after the debate, he said that the discussion in this race, quote, shouldn't be about the past. He does seem to be stuck in this dynamic where, like, now every story, anecdote, example he uses is sort of viewed through the prism of, does he have outdated racial and social views? And he kind of can't get out of this now. And so I wonder what I saw some people saying, well, his strategy is take on Trump, ignore his rivals. Can he continue that strategy?
I don't know. I don't know. I will say to you right now, yes, the tires are deep in the mud. He's pressing the accelerator. It is getting deeper. That's what is happening right now. And every word is being seen through this lens. If he wants to be president, he needs to show that he's the right person to be president. And it's definitely not going to be defending fucking busing on the stage. And it's not going to be
defending opposing busing.
It's not going to be. It's definitely not going to be defending opposing busing or your rationale for opposing busing. And the arguments about Joe Biden go to the core of his competence as a candidate. They go to the core of whether or not he can represent people today, whether he's too old, whether he's too establishment. These are the questions he has to answer. I don't know the right way for him to answer them, but they're legit. This isn't a side issue. That's the thing. Like, this is an attack on the core of his argument for why he should be the Democratic nominee. And if he wants to be the Democratic nominee, he has to answer it. And he has to answer it not just by speaking to the critique, but actually demonstrating that he isn't a candidate of the past. And that's really hard to do for somebody that's been in politics for 30 years. It's not impossible.
Yeah. I mean, he does. I think he has the right idea there with that line. This election shouldn't be about the past, and he can use that. Now, his rivals will say, but you have this record that you have to answer for, and I don't think he can avoid answering for it. But I think his best hope is to continue pivoting because look, I was even surprised that he raised his hand for some of the very progressive positions that they asked people to raise their hands for during the second debate. He has, policy-wise, I think he's certainly not the furthest left in the field, but you wouldn't put him in sort of the moderate camp either. So he has fairly mainstream Democratic progressive policies that he's for today. But his opponents are going to make the whole race, are going to try to make the whole race about his record, and not his record during the Obama administration, his record as a senator before that.
It's interesting too. Like when I think of Joe Biden on the debate stage, what I picture is someone talking about himself and talking about his record and talking about the past. But I don't actually he needs to say what he's going to do as president. Here are the things I want to do. Here's why I'm so excited to be in this race. Here's what we can do to make most of this opportunity. And I'm sorry, and when he makes his closing statement, this is a fight for the soul of the country. It also does feel backward looking, right? Like, okay, this is even his answer, what do you want to do as president? I want to beat Donald Trump, right? It all goes to the past or what the past will be if he were to win, right? The day, if we elect a Democratic president, we will have repudiated Trump. We will have successfully done something very, very hard. What's next?
Yeah, and I think to the extent that he hasn't, he's not for Medicare for all, he's for more of a robust public option. To the extent that he has policy differences with other candidates who are a bit further to the left, I think he has to make the case for why, right? Like you can't just pretend, okay, I'm going to sort of fuzz up my positions to make it seem like I'm just as progressive as them, and then I'm going to talk about beating Trump, and I'm going to talk about my record, and I'm not going to try to do anything beyond that because it's just playing prevent defense at that point. And I don't think that works. Like,
didn't work. And by the way, it didn't work for Hillary Clinton in 2008 either.
Well, exactly. And so I think you have to make an actual case for your set of policies, your worldview going forward. That doesn't have to do necessarily with Trump, and that doesn't necessarily have to do with your record. What do other candidates have to do to break through at this point? There was news this morning that Pete Buttigieg raised $24.8 million this quarter. He now has 400,000 donors total. That is obviously much more than any of the Democratic candidates raised last quarter. It is around what Obama and Clinton were raising in 2008 in a quarter. So and we haven't seen anyone else's number yet. The quarter ended Sunday night, but that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fucking money, and he's got like 22 million on hand, which is a lot. Which means his burn rate, how much they're spending on the campaign, is very low too.
Look, the good news for Pete is, even if he's not the nominee, he is going to crush that South Bend reelection. That is so much money to spend to be reelected.
Can use that.
No, let's hope he can, because man, the billboards. I mean, I don't know what it costs to get a billboard in South Bend, Indiana, but it can't be. You can probably get at least 10 of them for $25 million. I'm just kidding.
I mean, he's good. He's in this for the long haul for sure. That's what that means. He is.
Yes.
He is a candidate, and he can be a candidate for a very long time.
And as he should be. I mean, I think like he is. And it's a lesson for the other candidates, and it's a lesson for Harris too, which is that the only thing stopping you from becoming a front runner is you, really. Honestly, it is. If you want to, it's true.
That's why they
it's
tune
true.
in. That's why they tune
but
in.
It's
for that
absolutely
kind of but it is
true. No excuses.
People blame staff. They blame all this stuff. It's like you. Yes. Yeah. If you are truly talented, and the same thing. I mean, like, because you could have said that about Kamala Harris. She had the staff. She had the organization. It happened because she performed at that debate. She did that for herself. Elizabeth Warren, who didn't have a lot of donors and was struggling on fundraising, her campaign was written off a bunch of times. She pulled herself out of that hole.
Yeah, and Pete Buttigieg, Chasten, and Liz Smith in the back of an Uber Black fucking made this happen. So, hey, it's America. In parts of the country, democracy is alive and well. For now.
But yeah, no, I think it's, he's going to have to find, I think, probably a moment in future debates, sort of like, or a couple moments actually, sort of like Kamala had in this debate. And I think that's tough because you don't get a lot of fucking speaking time when there's all that many people on stage. And you really have to figure out a way to sort of command the stage. I hate talking about debates like this is the only way, because debates are a fucking dumb way to pick the president and they're all performance. But we are living in a media age and there's only so many ways to break through. And we know that breaking through in the media is, it's probably not as important as having a really fucking great organization on the ground in Iowa, but clearly just having an organization on the ground in Iowa and having good retail politics in Iowa and New Hampshire isn't enough these days.
And you know what? I'm not going to be embarrassed about caring about how these people hold a debate stage when one of them will likely have to face Donald Trump and will have huge implications for whether we win the election. Yeah. We're going to pick this president on television. One last point on Pete. This is just my own personal reaction. When he shot that look at Eric Swalwell, you talked about this on the last pod.
I
know, but I made a joke about it. But I think Pete was very strong in the debate. He, held his own on that debate stage. But in that look, what I saw was the ambition of someone who is a mayor of South Bend, Indiana, running for president. I saw the ambition, and we don't talk about ambition, and a lot of the times it's gendered, but every person on that stage has an incredible amount of ambition, and they try to hide it, right? Because we don't like someone saying, like, why are you running? It's like, well, because ever since I was a little boy, I knew I was the fucking best, right? Like, we don't like that. And yet, in that look, in that intensity, you saw what you need in a candidate. So I am actually interested in seeing the other side of the kind of staid and serious Pete Buttigieg. I'm interested in seeing the guy that is a mayor of a small town who looked at this field and said, like, this is my moment. I
mean, Obama used to talk about this. Even if you haven't been dreaming about this or planning this since you were a kid, if you are running for president, it is because you believe that out of a country of 300 million plus people, you are the best person to lead it.
Right.
So even if you just decided the week before the race that that's what you wanted to do, it's still a fucking lot of ambition there. It just is, You don't have to have been in kindergarten planning your run like the Clinton campaign accused Obama of doing.
In that essay. I mean, look, Liz Warren is taking every fucking photo. She's calling people back in her car. She is working so hard. And that's...
When Kamala Harris says, I'm going to win this race, you know that she means it.
Yeah.
And she said that. I'm going to win this race. And you're like, yeah, I fucking believe that the way she said it.
They had to replace Amy Klobuchar's podium because because underneath it, she just broke pieces of it with her hands.
Oh, my God.
Because she's fucking in it. That's what I like.
They're all in it to win it. All right. So the other big narrative coming out of the debates is this idea that the Democratic Party is moving too far to the left, which was the subject of multiple op-eds and analysis pieces in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other outlets. Here's Alex Burns and J Mart in the Times. Quote, vowing to eliminate private health insurance, decriminalize illegal immigration, and provide government health care benefits to undocumented immigrants. High-profile contenders like Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris are wagering that they can energize voters eager to dismantle President Trump's hardline policies. But with moderate Democrats repeatedly drowned out or on the defensive in the debates, the sprint to the left has deeply unnerved establishment Democrats, who have largely picked the party nominees in recent decades. They fear that advocating...
And what a great job they've done.
They fear that advocating a government-run healthcare system could alienate suburban and upper-income voters who are otherwise eager to eject Mr. Trump from office, while the most progressive immigration policies might turn off the working-class white voters who backed Mr. Trump after twice supporting former President Barack Obama. What do you think? I love that the Democratic Party establishment voices are always very concerned, but they're fucking too cowardly to put their name on the record. That's
well, some of them actually. One of the challenges is they don't always remember their own names because they've been they're actually in soundproof chambers that are unlocked to give comments for these articles. Just sort of it's one of those. Every once in a while somebody drowns in a sensory deprivation tank.
Does that happen every once in a while?
Once in a while.
Okay.
They're in one of those.
Yeah. Okay.
So. Here's what I think. I think all of this makes a lot of assumptions about how people feel about progressive policies, and makes a lot of assumptions about how people vote in America.
And I think a lot of assumptions about which people vote which way, because there's reading that paragraph, there's just a lot to untangle. There's a lot of things that are sort of conflated there
That's what I mean. You have to really unpack it. So first of all, on whether or not liberal policies will cost you. One of the things that's hardest for, I think, nonpartisan journalists to deal with is what do you do when the left-wing policies actually pull quite well amongst Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We've talked about this a lot, right? High taxes on the wealthy, expanding Medicare, expanding Medicaid. These things pull well. Even in states where Democrats can't win, you have Medicaid expansion in places like Idaho and Utah and Montana. So, you look at where actual voters are, even in some of the most conservative parts of the country, and there is an openness to liberal policies. That's the first thing. The second thing that these articles always avoid dealing with is that there are also hardcore Democrats who need to be enthused and turn out to vote as well. This is a point you make all the time, which is, electability, you can slice it and dice it in a million ways, but fundamentally it is about turning out core people who are either lifelong, engaged Democrats, or the kind of voters who are turned off by the fact that they don't believe politics goes far enough to help them, and the more moderates that you also need from these suburban places to turn out for you. How do you prioritize? Who can excite while also keeping moderates, coming to the table and supporting you? That's a really hard question. There are compromises involved in that, but this just sort of avoids half of the equation.
Yeah, but going back to your first point about the policies. So you mentioned a number of policies that are wildly popular. Raising taxes on the wealthy, wildly popular. And it's something that I think you're right that the mainstream media doesn't quite understand. They all call it populist. Are they going to turn off people on Wall Street because people in the fucking Acela corridor is who they talk to all the time? And the truth is, higher taxes on wealthy people. Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax is extremely popular not only among Democrats but among independents and even some Republicans. You talked about Medicaid expansion, wildly popular among all parties, even Republicans, even some Republicans. Medicare for All is an interesting example that we've talked about a number of times, where if you ask people, do you think that everyone should be able to get Medicare and that we should have Medicare for everyone? It's extremely popular. It's polling over 50% easily. When you tell people that Medicare for All will require the elimination of the private health insurance market and most likely middle-class taxes to go up, it becomes very unpopular. Now, Medicare for All proponents will say, well, this private health insurance thing is sort of bullshit, and I've heard them make the point, what people really want is not necessarily their insurance plan to keep. They want their doctor. And under Medicare for All doctors are in the same network. And so if we have a Medicare for All system, you're going to get your doctor no matter where you go. And then maybe people will like that more, right? But I guess my point is, if you are backing an unpopular policy, a policy that does not command wide majority support in this country, it is incumbent on you as a politician, as someone advocating for this policy, to talk about it in a way that is most politically effective and popular, right? So you have to make the case for Medicare for all, a single-payer system, and why this problem is so important that only a single-payer system right away can solve it, and not, for example, enrolling a bunch of people in Medicare and letting everyone in the country choose to enroll in Medicare. It is incumbent on you to make the case why the single-payer system is so much more important than a public option system or Medicare for America or any of these other alternatives where you can sort of enroll. You have to make that case. And the same thing is true on immigration, right? Like, we talked about this in the last pod, but, under the Affordable Care Act, Barack Obama promised that undocumented immigrants wouldn't be part of this healthcare system because it was tough to convince. It's not about Republican politicians. It was tough to convince a lot of Americans that their tax dollars should do that. Now, again, as we said, there's an argument to be made for why when an undocumented immigrant goes to the emergency room and they get treated, it's going to end up costing taxpayers more than it would to make sure that that person has health insurance and is covered and has preventive care. Like, you can make an argument, but we got to make the argument. And I worry that we're not quite making the argument.
Yes. So I do think, right. So I feel like, though, that I think that's all true. And I do think that, what am I trying to say? It's almost, I think that's all true, but it's almost as if that's a separate point, because the nuances of making the case for single payer, the nuances for making the case around immigration don't go to the core of the kind of political concerns inside of this article, right? Like, I don't believe that the moderate pundits would be less turned off today if anyone had made that kind of an argument. These are people coming to the table.
But I still think
to make this argument.
It's hard to disentangle all this, because you almost have to start the argument by saying, fuck the moderate pundits, fuck the Bret Stephens column,
right?
and fuck the idea that, we must please Republican politicians because we need them. Like, all that aside, just think about the voters, right? Think about assembling a coalition in this country that is that can get you 270 electoral votes, and they can get you a majority in the Senate. That's what you should be thinking about, right? Like, don't worry about what Bret Stephens thinks. Don't worry about Republican politicians think. And how do you get that coalition? And I think, we have, or at least some Democrats have convinced ourselves that all you need to do is increase turnout among the base and go after those voters who stayed home in 2016 or who voted for third party, and then you've magically got the coalition, and that's good. And I think that some other people, some of these pundits, have convinced themselves the only way for Democrats to win is to win back all these Obama-Trump voters. And I think that's incorrect as well. But I think the point is, it's not an easy call which side is right, and it's definitely a both and.
Yes, that's right.
Because, like, what we forget is, in 2012, 1 out of every 3 Obama voters was a non-college educated white person, which is the exact demographic that we have been losing for decades and decades. And the idea that, sometimes we're like, oh, well, they're all sort of like racist Trump voters. They're not, because a third of them have been in our coalition through both Obama terms. And by the way, Hillary was actually a little less than 1 in 3, but she still had a bunch too. And if we do worse among non-college whites than Hillary did, it doesn't matter how much of our base we can turn out. It doesn't matter if we increase African American turnout to Obama levels. It doesn't matter if we find a whole bunch of new voters. It's just the math. 44% of eligible voters in this country are non-college educated white voters. That is the largest block in the country.
It's I also think so much of this conversation gets separated by. So it's amazing how everyone's political preferences flow from their policy preferences.
Right, of course.
So that's like the inevitable Twitter debate, which is pretty unhelpful. This is the point about not trying to please the pundits, not trying to please anybody else. It's a genuine political strategic question, right? We can talk about the policy and talk about the moral argument for single payer. It's an argument I agree with. But you come back to, what is the best way to win? Now, if the argument is, here's why single payer, and getting fully behind that and explaining it is the best way to win, I'm fine. I really am very comfortable with that. That's
Same.
a great way to if having that big of a distinction is the way we need to convince people that we're on their side, make that argument, I'll come on board.
Yeah, look, and I think the same is true on immigration, right? Like, we know that there is a large majority of people in this country who are on board with a pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, including the Dreamers, but beyond the Dreamers, all 11 million people who are here undocumented right now. There is a large majority for ending family separations, for ending these mass detentions, for ending these mass deportations, for building a orderly immigration system in this country where you can apply for citizenship, you can apply for asylum, you can get your case heard, it's efficient. We spend more resources at the border, not necessarily on security, but on judges and immigration judges to make sure these asylum claims are heard. There's a large majority in the country in favor of this. And I think, we talked about sort of Castro's proposal to repeal 1325, which decriminalizes immigration altogether on the last pod. And I think when I think about that proposal, the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, well, the next Democratic president can achieve everything you want to achieve through that repeal, through executive action. So why necessarily do we need to make that a litmus test for every Democratic candidate for president when we know that the big challenge that we have is not only ending all of these awful Trump immigration policies, but providing citizenship for all the people who are here as undocumented immigrants, and making sure we have a better legal, more humane immigration system. Like, that should be our number one concern. And so, if you want to be for repeal of 1325, like, that's fine. And I think there's good debates on why it's important, why it's not a good idea, why it's a bad idea. There's a lot of debates on that, but I don't think we should be in like litmus test territory on some of this stuff.
Well, especially because it is the next president will face an emergency of undoing all the damage Donald Trump has done, and the incredible challenge of building a coalition around comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah.
And the odds that this is part of that debate are actually quite small, to be honest.
Almost infinitesimal, because you can achieve what you want to through executive action, right? Like, and we've been talking to all these candidates. Will you get rid of the filibuster? Some of them will, some of them won't. But like, let's imagine what we have here. Say we win the Senate and we win the presidency, and there's 50-something seats, and what are you going to do? A lot of them, Elizabeth Warren, people like that, have said democracy reform. A lot of them talked about Medicare for all. So now we're going to get to immigration reform, which no one has said is going to be their first priority, which is too bad. I hope it's someone's first priority. Maybe it's Castro's. Maybe I could be mistaken. But then you're going to get to immigration reform, and you're right. You have to get a bunch of Democratic senators on board from these red states for comprehensive immigration reform that legalizes 11 million people in this country, provides a pathway to citizenship, and sort of ends all of Trump's policies. Like, that's going to be a big task. to say the least. That's going to be a big task. And I'm not saying like trim our sails and everything and stuff like that. I'm just saying, because we should be bold and we should be progressive in everything we say, but like, if you're going to embrace a policy that may not command majority support in the country, think about, I'm not saying don't do that, but think about how urgent is it that we pass this policy to solve one of the problems that we couldn't solve in another way.
Yeah.
Okay. When we come back, we will have Lovett's interview with Ari Berman of Mother Jones.